All right, everybody, let's get this show on the road here. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, Incident Response Explained. Big topic today. We're continuing to see compromise after compromise in the news these days, changed healthcare, MGM Grand, list goes on. We're going to be learning today about what actually happens during and after a major cyber incident. My name is Rob Schenk, and I'm with Intelligent Technical Solutions, where we specialize in helping small and medium businesses thrive by managing and securing their tech. We help our clients do their most important work by growing their business without having to worry about the underlying tech and security platforms. So a few housekeeping notes and we'll get going here. Webinar is going to run a little over 30, 35 minutes or so, but we'll stick around a little bit longer at the end to answer any questions that come up. The webinar will be recorded. If you'd like to review some of the information later at your convenience or share this with other colleagues, you'll be able to do so. We're happy to take questions during the webinar, and we want to make this as collaborative as possible, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Alrighty, next slide there. So you'll notice a QR code in the lower right there. That leads to an offer at the end for attendees of the webinar. If you happen to need to cut out early or something, you can feel free to take a picture of that and save it for later use. For today's discussion, I'd like to introduce our very special guests. First off, I have Sean Harris, Senior VP of Cybersecurity here at ITS. Sean has been an IT business owner for over 15 years and now plays a critical role in cybersecurity strategy, incident response, and manages our security operations center here at ITS. He's been an alphabet soup behind his name, including a CISSP. And I'd also like to welcome Monique Bardawil. She's the head of strategic and response services here at Field Effect. She's been a cybersecurity leader with over 23 years of experience. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
All righty. So to get started here, let's get some definitions out of the way. So maybe we start off with Monique with, maybe you can just define what a cyber incident is. Can you help us out here and maybe talk about some common mistakes that you see in the wild out here?
Yeah, thank you. Nice to have everybody here. So in its simplest definition, really, a cybersecurity incident is an event that is impacting an IT environment. Obviously, those vary in severity, but the main goal is when a threat actor is trying to control, disrupt the environment, gain access to data with the aim of with a financial motivation. So the aim is to extort money from an organization. Obviously, these vary in severities and also the types of threat actor, but what we see impacting businesses these days are all financially motivated. In terms of mistakes and where we see companies make mistakes, is they detect an incident, maybe they wait too long, maybe they under triage the situation, or they try to they don't reach out for help to get assistance, because cybersecurity is a specialty in a way. And at the same time, sometimes they focus on restoration. I want to keep the business up and running, and as a result, you lose forensic evidence that is needed to answer questions about the impact of the incident and how far did the threat actor get into the network. And overall, it's really the lack of readiness. So there's a bit of panic, a bit of decision making that needs to happen, and if you're not prepared, those become quite difficult.
Sean, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many signals out there. If you're watching and listening, at any given time, you may have bad actors trying to get into your email accounts. You may have them pinging your firewalls. There's all kinds of things out there. And so it is hard to know what's considered an event versus what is an incident. And so I think that, it's important that you clarify that ahead of time for your organization and figure out playbooks and different things that we'll talk about later. But yeah, that's a great point, Monique. Thanks, Rob.
Alrighty. So Monique, maybe we can just talk about let's get to maybe the reality of what an incident is like. What is it really like? Can you walk us through that process a bit? What does it look like for a company going through something like this?
So I'll caveat this by saying no two incidents are the same. So they vary. All of our organizations have different IT and has the impact, and the incident is different. But there are some common threads that we see as incident responders, is that they always happen at the most inconvenient time. So when people are gone holidays or vacations or long weekends, Christmas, whatever, that's what happens. Threat actors want to take advantage of that kind of downtime that nobody's watching. they range in sophistication. Sometimes threat actors will use what's available, what's easy for them, and sometimes they will try quite hard to get into a network, or they'll use more complex tools. So the same threat actor could use two different types of tools. They do take advantage of the weakest link. So if it is an exposed service that is not protected well, they'll take advantage of that. If it's a user clicking, unintentionally clicking on a bad link, downloading malware, or providing their password, that does happen. They will take advantage of whatever's there. And they do not discriminate. So a threat actor wants to make money. If it's a small business of 12 people or 300 people, they will do that. And it's mostly the common thing is money, financially motivated. They want to make money, and they'll take whatever dollars you give them.
Yeah, for sure. What about like the emotional reaction, like if, to an incident, like how does a team typically respond? I would imagine this is a very stressful period.
Exactly. This tends to be like the worst day for any organization, whether it's a small incident impacting one email account, it still distracts you from your normal business and it takes away resources. So there's a lot of pressure. In a more complex or more severe incident like ransomware, we are talking about the complete business disruption in some cases, and that causes pressure on people, pressure on organization. The things that we typically, we would assume should be okay, they're not. It tends to be pressure intensive. Lots of decision making needs to be made, and that kind of weighs on a team. And I think that's what we forget, is that in the end, it's people responding, and that can have a heavy lift.
For sure. Pretty sobering discussion. Sean, what have you seen in your experience? You're muted.
Monique touched on it. Going into any 3-day holiday is like, right now is the joke that every IT professional sits there and crosses their fingers and does everything that they can to try to prepare for it, right? The Kaseya ransomware was on the July 4th weekend. That JBS or meatpacking incident was on the Memorial Day weekend. Colonial Pipeline was on Mother's Day weekend. So any holiday out there, you can assume at this point that there's some kind of attack being launched. And the takeaway is not, hey, let's just protect holidays. Those are the days that they're attacking. So now we got to figure it out, right? The takeaway is that like you're building a plan on how to escape, or how to, let's say, your fire escape plan that you might do for your building. You have a path on how to get out. You have all the exits clearly marked, but now you need to think about, well, what if my hand was broken, or what if I was blind, or what if my foot was, so it's the idea of, well, how do we do it if the key people are not available? How do we do it if all of our communication systems are down? Like, how do we, so I think you do need to think about those worst case scenarios. Otherwise you haven't really made a proper plan. So yeah, I just wanted to take an extra moment on that Monique brought up, because that's the biggest issue right now for us.
Yeah, good point, Sean. So let's say an event has occurred. The calls are coming in, the alerts are coming in. Monique, can you kind of walk us through the first steps of what a company should be doing to respond if you find yourself in this kind of a situation? Where do we start?
Yeah, so when victims contact us and we're trying to help them, is we do what they should be doing, is like assess the situation. So ask about the incident, what have you noticed, what evidence are you seeing so far, what are the symptoms, so to speak, and then what actions have you taken so far. So we want to understand that. Where are your current concerns? Are you, do you want to ensure your business is up and running? You already know that data may have been taken. So we want to understand the baseline of the situation, then provide them some additional containment and mitigation advice. In most cases, they haven't thought about small tactical things that are quite important. And that is where kind of incident responders that have seen a number of incidents will point out these little gaps that you may forget. We want to preserve data. So we want to emphasize to a victim, we need to preserve data, whether you want to do an investigation or not. You can, we want to restore, but we need the evidence. You may need that in the future. We always ask about, have you contacted your insurance? Do you want to contact your insurance if you have one? Have you considered legal counsel? Because obviously with all of these attacks that we're seeing and that we see, is that there is data being stolen, and that in most cases has sensitive information, personal information. And that is where we want to ensure counsel is informed so that they can advise the company. And it's really, then it's like, how do we then help you? So me as an incident responder and my team, where can we go and help you in this based on what we know so far? And that's the key aspect.
Yeah, makes sense. So what are best practices and approaches that a company can take when when they're experiencing this kind of cyber incident, and how do you kind of minimize the time to recovery?
So really the key aspect in minimizing is, or in just best practices in our approach to incidents, is that we take a two-pronged approach. We are always looking at, we want to understand what happened. One, to know how did the threat actor get into the network. So we want to close that gap and we identify it. We want to understand what did they do within the network? How far did they impact? Did they access data? What did they do to access data? What data was accessed? Those are really important. But at the same time, we want to do this as we are restoring and recovering the environment, because our main goal is to minimize a company's downtime in terms of operations. So we want to do this at the same time. And for us to restore a network in a secure way is we want to make sure we are monitoring that network. One, to ensure that the mitigations and the containment are functioning well, but also that there are no ongoing threat actor activities. So is the threat actor attempting to regain access? Have they left malware behind that is potentially beaconing out? All of that is information for us to ensure it's blocked and that you're recovering safely. So in our approach as investigators, we wanted to do both in a synchronous manner. It's to ensure there's progress across.
Yeah, Sean, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of years ago, I went to Home Depot and I bought. I'll just tell this story because I think it aligns with this. And I bought one of those do-it-yourself shed kits, right? Pretty big shed in my backyard. My wife and I did it. And we ran into a couple of issues, but it wasn't anything major. But we had to bring someone over that kind of had done it before, right? And so, those do-it-yourself things work fine until you run into something that's out of the ordinary. And so I think that's what we see with internal IT or IT in general, just dealing with something that maybe they don't have the experience. Sometimes it can actually be a bit of a process to find where the foothold was, all the, how did this actually happen? And so with working with like an IR team, I think is important. Finding that IR team ahead of time before the incident happens can help you get kind of the wisdom that's needed in order to keep the stakeholders steady, right? Where they don't say, hey, what's going on here? This has happened again. And, it's no, that's part of the process. We're going through it now. Here's where we're finding this. And so I think that's a good thing to just emphasize, and hope you guys don't mind. I'm just going to keep bringing analogies every time here for you. I'll think of some more on the next couple.
Sounds good. And what about an IR plan? Like, it's one of the things I've been hearing recently is like the importance of like, okay, what are the most important numbers? Legal counsel, tech leads, internal communications folks, and making sure that you have a hard copy of this, and that it's, because your systems are down during this kind of a situation, right? So you're not able to get to your email, you can't get to your file server. So making sure that all the stakeholders have a hard copy printout of this information, readily accessible, so you guys don't have to think at that moment in time, seems to be like a pretty important thing for all of us to be considering as just kind of a step one. Who do we talk to, where, when, and how?
It kind of carries the theme of the 3-day weekend thing too, of just you really need to think about worst case scenarios and plan for those. And that's something later I think we discussed too, of going through it and making sure that it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, Monique, so now we're kind of in the throes of a cyber incident. How should a company be managing the case? I know there's a lot of moving parts. Easy to kind of get overwhelmed here. So what are best practices around this?
Yeah. So ideally, a company who is prepared has its own incident response team, and it could be who people who are making the decisions, people who are communicating, people who are doing all that work. Us as kind of case managers, and that's what I'll label it, is kind of the lead who is working with a victim. Our goal in this is to become an extension of their team and just to try to alleviate stress, right? So there's a lot happening. There's a lot of decision making that is being asked of a company to make with very little information at some point. So we take care of some of that effort in terms of external coordination, giving them updates on the investigation, on the mitigations, on the monitoring, so that and working with their team. So as their team is maybe collecting forensic evidence or doing restorations of systems, we are working with them throughout that process. That is key because you have to become an extension of the victim's team. Otherwise, it becomes it will be points of friction. So obviously advice and remediations and using the experience that we have to kind of look out for the things that they are not watching for, as kind of Sean mentioned earlier. And obviously always for us is kind of presenting the considerations from a legal and aspect in terms of negotiations, privacy of information, just simply because we have seen so many, we kind of pull on that. Obviously we're not legal advisors and we're not negotiators, so we don't offer that. But we have seen enough to kind of say these are the things you should consider as you're approaching these sensitive topics, because they do have some certain implications for a company.
What about just general communication strategies? I mean, how should, like, they're going to get inundated with requests from clients, from partners, communication with internal team members, making sure that they're saying the right things. What kind of guidance can you offer in that regard?
Yeah, so communications are quite they need to be maneuvered very carefully, I will say, especially at the first stages, right? So you hinted to it, internal versus external communication. So we need to tell our employees, what do you do? Do you show up to work? Do you not show up to work? Do you connect to your system? What are we telling them? And why are we asking them not to connect to the system? So knowing what to tell and when to tell it is really important. So that isn't kind of, you don't want to tell too early, but you don't want to also leave your employees blind. Then the other aspect is the external communications with your partners, with your clients, with people you're providing services to. So how do you do that? Now, you could say, we're investigating an IT issue, but then, when do you say that and how is very important, because obviously for companies, there could be liability implications of not having a service available, for instance. So those are really important. This is where we would provide our recommendations, but also external counsel or their breach coach. So a counsel who specializes in breaches will help a company maneuver that fine kind of line between what to tell when to tell it. And also then there's also the other aspect is of communications to regulatory maybe bodies or governments, that you need to at least tell them or report that you are investigating an incident, and depending on where you operate and within which industry, you have certain timelines that you need to inform them by.
Yep.
So quite tricky.
I think
Sean, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Monique touched on another thing. Ahead of time, reaching out to your law firm to make sure that it's in fact something that they can do. I had a law firm for years when I ran my small business that was really great for business law, but they didn't really understand this portion of it. And so, you don't want to figure that out while you're in the throes of an event, of something that's happening, an incident. So I think it's very important to kind of bet that ahead of time. And that's part of building that IR plan too, is, well, what would they recommend? Getting that information ahead of time once you've determined that they in fact can do that kind of work and that they're the right partner for it.
Yep. Good points. So Monique, you mentioned, so the incident, it's ongoing, right? So we're in the middle of it, and now we need to start thinking about, okay, how did things happen? What we're talking about here, like a forensic analysis. Maybe you can talk through that a bit.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So, we need to forensically investigate data that's available. Obviously, what we find is dependent on the data that you have available within your systems or where the logs are. But we are trying to answer really 5 main questions. When did the incident occur? How, when did it start? Because that's important for restoration and knowing what your safe point is. When did it finish? How was the attack conducted? How did they get in? What did they do? What did they use? Where did they conduct their activities? So which systems were impacted? Again, here is to know which systems you need to restore. What data did they take or access? That is a key point. And then why was it conducted? In most cases, the why is quite straightforward. It is for financial gain. And that is where those are kind of the main things we're trying to answer in terms of an investigation.
Gotcha. So we're moving through the incident now. We have an understanding of what happened. We've done a forensic analysis. And at the same time, kind of in parallel, you're saying earlier that we want to make sure that we're securing the infrastructure and rooting out any potential backdoors that they have. I know like threat actors often plant backdoors in different places in case, one access method or point gets kind of severed, they still have another way to get in. So maybe you can talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, indeed. So security monitoring is actually key point to restoration. So, and the way we approach this is we want to have a full view of your environment from a network. So we have a network sensor that we put in place. We want to understand what's happening on the endpoint. So an endpoint agent that is able to, be installed on servers and workstations for us to monitor, what is happening, and obviously your cloud as well. So if it's a Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace that you're using, how do we secure all of that environment? So that is very important. We also need to take in what we learned from the investigation and feed it into the monitoring. So, if we have noticed that they are using a remote access tool or remote management tool that is legitimate but not normal on this network, then we should be able to block that if we see it running again. Those are the things that are important. And obviously, in a security solution, you want to have that solution being able to respond, not just detect and report, but take action on your behalf. So that if we are seeing something bad, you don't want to worry about that. And every time have somebody go block or isolate a system, we want to be able to do that kind of as near real time as possible. And that's what we're aiming to do here, is that in helping you restore security.
Makes sense. Sean, anything to add here?
Well, yeah, I think the partner with the wisdom, right? The working with a good IR team that maybe has a tool like that to monitor is part of dealing with the whack-a-mole scenario of things popping back up. And the wisdom that they have around tactics, techniques, and procedures, the TTPs and the indicators of compromise, IOCs, like things that are in there. And I like to say that TTPs or tactics, techniques, and procedures are like how a flu might occur. So, you get sneezed on, you don't wash your hands, something like that. And the indicators of compromise are more the symptoms of the thing that already happened. So in that case, this might be the cough, this might be, having a temperature. But so a good team that can do the security monitoring has a very good idea of what those things are. And then they're going to do kind of the doctor portion of what Monique was saying, of asking, hey, is this normal for you? Maybe you run a little hot. Maybe that remote software tool that you have actually is something that you use internally. And so then they can go, okay, that's not an indicator of compromise. So I think, yeah, that's been a huge thing. And as we were working with Field Effect, ITS, for many years now, but bringing in that level of fidelity of seeing those things, you really can't deal with an incident without bringing in something like that, because the client or whoever we're dealing with will say, well, have you figured it out? Is everything done? And we're not really 100% sure, so we need to monitor. We need to make sure, because depending upon the complexity of the attacker, there's all the way up to nation state actors, right? These very complex attackers. It can be extremely complex what they've done. It can be very intertwined into everything. And so it's very important to monitor that. Or even an insider, right? If you have someone in your organization that has caused this, they may know you for years and years. And that's the worst, that's the fear that we all wakes us up in the middle of the night as business owners or organization leaders. But you have to deal with that possibility.
Yep. So the investigation is wrapping up. You have systems in place for security monitoring. So what does a next step look like to kind of close out an incident, Monique?
So really, it's about ensuring your systems and networks are restored, that you're back to normal operations. That is kind of the goal. As we said earlier, restoration is happening throughout the process, and it's the best way to do that is to, one, know which systems were compromised, and then to also know which systems you need to restore first. So what is critical for your information, and that takes for your operations. And that takes us back to what we said at the beginning. It's about preparation, so that at least you know which systems or which service you have to restore back for your clients. So it becomes about internal preparation, but that is the goal. So if we finish the investigation, we need to kind of ensure that restorations are in place. And then as the environment is restored, the monitoring is in place, you have the investigative report that told you what happened. It's about closing that incident. And obviously there are post-incident issues that come up, but that is kind of where we focus on in terms of closing the investigation.
Okay. So there's been closure, you've done the restoration. So what happens after an incident?
So I would say this is as important as what happens during an incident, because it is where we learn, right? So the first thing what typically happens in this, after we close it, is obviously there's legal obligations and notifications, and your legal counsel here plays a big role. That can continue for maybe weeks or months sometimes after the incident happens. So that is important. Obviously, if victim information was taken, so your client information, banking information, you need to notify those individuals to let them know that their information was compromised. You may choose to inform authorities. So that could happen during or post incident. And as Sean mentioned, indicators of compromise, that is really what authorities care about, because they can then use that to potentially have an impact on the networks of these cyber criminals and kind of take action on that on that front. And then internally, it's about, you need to reflect, what did we do? What went well? What didn't go well? What are the issues in our security? Where do we put mitigations? How do we improve? How do we improve our plans, our policies, our processes? That is the lessons learned aspect in terms of what do we take this so that we don't have to go through it again. And if we do have to go through it, that we are more organized, right? And then, because incidents will continue to happen, how severe they get and when do you stop them? That's what's important. And that's what having the right kind of controls and monitoring in place will allow you to control that. And obviously, don't forget about your employees. You can't just put it under the rug and hide the fact that you had an incident. Be upfront saying this is what occurred. Maybe you don't have to go into the level of details, etc. But you do need to let them know, because they play an important factor in cybersecurity, because we as humans still interact with technology and we make mistakes. So telling your employees about what happened, how they can help you, is important.
Sean, additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think an incident really is a sprint followed by a marathon, and then a discussion about the marathon and the sprint at the end. And so you have a reactive event that requires a lot of proactive work, and all the postmortems that are done that find those indicators of compromise, that's what feeds the wisdom to know what those things are the next time around. And without those, we don't grow as a community. Your organization doesn't learn how to do things better. This incident response plan is essentially orchestrating a bunch of other really important governance plans, which is disaster recovery, business continuity, all these pieces, right? So you're at the end of it, you can look at each of those things and go, hey, we had a real life test here. We didn't mean to have it, but do these things work? Do these things make sense? And so I think that's tough, because many IT departments are already overworked and possibly even understaffed. And that's a very common thing. And so they get something done that's in their face, this reactive thing, and then there's other things, reactive things that are coming at you. And that's why it absolutely has to be built into the plan. It has to be, hey, part of the postmortem, this is not done. It is not complete until we do this part. And so that's a critical thing that I do see get missed sometimes when I'm working with internal departments. And so it's a critical thing it's not fun, but it's absolutely, we can't get better if we don't do it. And it's required in many incidents to wrap up and have that reporting aspect, like what Monique was saying. And, if you want to get some maybe reimbursement or some compensation through insurance, all that is going to require that you do a proper postmortem to communicate that.
Yeah. All right, so we've gone through pretty much the entire life cycle of an incident. So now maybe we can talk through about how do we become prepared as an organization? How do we get ahead of this before something happens? Maybe Monique, you can touch on that.
Yeah, of course. So I can't emphasize the importance of preparation, because it does alleviate the stress that we talked about at the beginning. So really, when we think about preparation, we think obviously about technology and the people and the processes, and all of that is part of how you become ready. So from a technical perspective, it's about reducing your threat surface, making sure that we have our right cybersecurity controls in place, that we have monitoring in place. So investing in monitoring in advance is worth it, because it should decrease the headache later. That is the main aim. But it is about kind of that threat surface reduction. From a people and a process aspect, then we really need to focus about our plan and how do we react should something happen. And so what are the roles and responsibilities? Who is signing the check? Who is making the decision? Who is calling insurance? All of that aspect of it is about being prepared, but also internal. So who is the lead IT person that's going to lead the incident? Who are they talking to? Do they know to reach out to a certain investigator? All of that is important. Obviously, processes like backup and restoration management, that's important. Where are my backups? Are my backups okay? Can I restore them? Is my restoration process working? So those are important in terms of, being prepared is continuously trying to test those to make sure we can react quickly. And as we mentioned earlier, Rob, it's about communications. So having a communication template in place. In some cases, depending on your profile as an organization, if you are really, in the public view, then you may need a bit more than just communicating to a small set of clients or internally. Then there's PR and reputational implications, and those are important. So depending on what sector and where you are in the economy, that makes the difference. And then finally, is to practice. So Sean gave the example of a sprint and a marathon. Well, you don't just start those, you need to practice those, you need to kind of train. And then how do we train for that? So, and it is about building that muscle memory.
Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, so I ran a business for years in California, and I'm still in California here. And I remember the first couple of years of the business, my CPA would tell me each year as I was putting in my taxes, hey, you should have an employee manual. Here's how this is what I suggest. And I knew the importance of it, but I didn't get to it. And I think the second or third year, I asked him, hey, what's your employee manual? And turned out he didn't have one either. And so he was telling me to fill this thing out. So don't let the incident response plan be one of those things that you need to do, but you don't do. This is way more impactful. Being in California, not having an employee manual can be impactful because there's a lot of employer laws as there are in other areas. But this is essentially, what is the value of your business? What are the implications? What's the liability of all the people that you help in your business? All of the families that work for you, like their livelihood. This is all at stake here. So think about the stakes. I used to, when I was running that business, I would acquire new clients, and thinking about the lifetime value of that client was something that would put into perspective that maybe I should prepare for the meetings that I had, which I think we all agree you should prepare for important meetings, just like an Olympic trainer would prepare for an important meet. I think it's the same thing with this incident response. This is the worst case scenario of things that can happen to your business that can put you out of business. And so I think it's pretty critical. I think it really has to be top down though. You have to have buy-in from the leadership, and there has to be budgeting for it, and there has to be, hey, we're going to do this. So I think that's a critical part of it too.
Yeah. So to that end, we work with clients just like you every day as your trusted cyber advisor. So as we talked about, having an incident response plan playbook is really critical. It's really about being ready for that event, developing some cyber resilience and being able to respond really quickly under duress, because it's one of those things you don't want to be developing a plan while you're going through an incident. That's kind of a recipe for a lot of issues. And because we see so many organizations face challenges putting together a plan, we've partnered with Field Effect to present what we call the IR Readiness service. This is great for planning. It's going to be a full playbook, meets industry standards and cyber insurance requirements, and basically will effectively build an effective response plan that's going to be custom designed for your organization. It'll help you strengthen your ability to recover from attacks and really minimize that amount of time. It'll be expert-led and implemented. So to that end, if you are interested in fast tracking your incident response conversation, please you can drop an email to secure@itsasap.com. You can feel free to scan that QR code that we have in the bottom right there, and we'll happy to be in touch and help you guys out. So I guess with that, we will transition over to questions. We got a bunch of questions in the chat here, so I want to kind of get to those. Let's see. Questions for Monique or Sean, whoever wants to chime in. If I have a cybersecurity solution, do I also need an IR plan?
I can take that. I would say yes, because as we talked about, cybersecurity solution is going to look at your tech, but also then your plan is about how do you coordinate, who do you reach out to, who makes the decision. It is more of kind of, you know, in a response event, there's technical aspects and there's non-technical aspects, and it's the plan is going to tie in both. Really, how it's going to look at your backups, going to look at your log management, it's going to look at all of that important stuff, but it's also going to look about communications, telling employees who's making the decisions. All of that is those soft aspects of a response, which I think are quite critical.
We've had clients, I just want to add a little bit to this. We've had clients that are required to do this, and I work with them in a virtual CISO capacity where we're helping them build out their governance, and they're required to do something, and they go, well, you guys have one and you're our IT company, why don't we just use yours? And that's not really how it works. It's not a one size fits all, because that wouldn't be a good plan. If I sent you over my fire escape plan for my building, it's not going to really help an emergency in your building when it's on fire. So I think, you got to map the exits and all the things for your building, and that's critical. The other thing that we probably don't do a great job of at ITS I think that's the point of webinars like this, is that just because you have the security products in place doesn't mean that you've thought about all those other things that you have to do. And there's a governance leadership portion of that's critical to do in addition. And so I think that, these are our efforts to communicate that better to different organizations out there. And so I think it's critical to think about that. Do you have a plan?
Just for clarity, you mentioned vCISO service, Sean. Can you say what that is? Just high level.
Oh, yeah, sure. So for some clients, we have generally clients that have certain frameworks that they have to meet. So maybe they're going through a SOC 2 audit, or perhaps they are CMMC or FTC safeguards, or if you haven't heard of any of these things, then it means it probably doesn't apply to you. But generally speaking, there's these frameworks that you have to align with. The vCISO services are a monthly, it's a monthly commitment over a year that essentially we go through and find the gaps of your organization in comparison to whatever framework that was, and then we help bridge those gaps. And that might include talking about your incident response plan. It might include saying, hey, Field Effect would be great at building this for you. It seems like you don't have one. So.
Cool. I got a question. Cyber policies require certain security protocols to be in place prior to insuring you. Knowing that, how valuable is a cyber insurance policy, knowing that you're already doing much of the protection and safeguards?
I think that becomes an organizational decision, right? It's the same as your home. I don't need to have, policies to insure my home, but I do, so that just in case something happens. So there's a bit of that. Certainly, I think you need to do both in most cases. I would say most organizations do both. They want to have the right things in place, but also have that safety net, right? I don't want to, just in case there's a flood, I still don't want to pay for it. The other thing is that there is a risk. There's, threat actors are always evolving. There are always 0-day exploits that come out. There are always vulnerabilities that are being discovered. Us in industry are always working to prevent those from, impacting your network. But there is a bit of a risk here. But I would say it's a decision for the organization. But it's not a one or the other. Potentially, it could be one and the other.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I would say that you need both 100% of the time. So I do think Monique is a point. All these are decisions to make. And if you're working to you're assessing your risk as an organization, most organizations are in the business of making money. That's the risk that they're trying to guard against. And so you can do risk assessments. That's part of what we do also with vCISO services. And you have to figure out what are your risks. And so one of them, or quite a few of them, are now cybersecurity related. And so what do you do with that risk? Do you transfer it through insurance? Do you mitigate it? Do you avoid it? Those are all different things that you can do. And so unfortunately, there's nothing out there that will bring the risk down to zero. None of these tools. If that were the case, we wouldn't have to have a webinar about incident response, and Monique wouldn't have many, many stories of different organizations out there that had incidents. And so, yeah, there's always going to be that issue. And I love the analogy that Monique gave. Like you put up fire, smoke alarms, but you still have insurance on your home. Like there's still possibility of something happening.
let's see, what is the difference between this and an IR plan template that I can find on the internet?
So I think there's a couple of things in this service that goes beyond just a template. So templates are general. Certainly, many organizations use them and can build it. So here, what we developed in this service is one, we do a threat surface assessment. So what is your threat surface? What controls do you have to add to one, minimize it? So we need to consider that. The other thing here is what we've taken in developing this service is what we've learned in delivering incident response to clients. That is the key thing. So we've taken what we have learned, where we've seen in organizations struggle when they're victimized, and how do we then help them not get to that panic point. So it is about tailoring the plan to you as well and your organization. So you get a better understanding of where you are, what you're doing, what are your concerns, what kind of cyber incidents have you experienced in the past, what types of playbooks are the most important to you, and then really it's about tailoring it versus having something that's downloaded and just used. That is an approach, but it's not going to address what we've learned from cybersecurity. You're missing that kind of learning.
I would go back to the shed thing that I was talking about. If you run into any issue, you're not going to know. There's all that experience, but also how many people have bought that kit? I know this because it sat there for quite a while and never put it together. They never actually went through and made sure that all the pieces were put together for the shed, or the same of you download a template and you don't actually go through all the steps that are required, or you don't know what you don't know. So you don't even know which steps you need to go through. So if you can do it that way, I think that's great. If you have someone that owns it, that's going to research and get all the experience, and I mean, that's better than nothing, right? But I do think that this is one of the most critical things, as I said earlier. It could be the livelihood of all of your employees. It could be your business that you've had, your organization that's been around. And so it might make sense to have a professional help with it. Just like certain things that we do with lawyers, with business documents, critical documents, same thing.
I mean, I've heard that like 60% of businesses that have a major cyber incident end up going out of business, I think within 18 months or something like that. So to your point, this is something that's super impactful. Let's see, one other question that came in terms of legal obligations of notifying about a cyber incident, anything that we should keep in mind?
So really, it all depends on where you operate. So the jurisdiction that you operate in, from a state or federal, obviously that makes a difference. Knowing obligations also, if you're a law firm, you will have certain obligations to the law society that you belong to. There are aspects of depending on what industry you operate in. If you're PCI compliance, that also makes a difference. So all of those things are important. So that's important. So it is about just understanding, knowing what kind of data you also have on your network. So, obviously information management makes a difference. Do I hold credit card information? Do I hold, social insurance numbers? All of that kind of, that information is what becomes sensitive in terms of reporting and obligations.
I think that's part of like the building of the IR plan, is figuring that out and then revisiting it each year to see if there's anything new, because there's new obligations coming out all the time, new legal requirements.
I got looks like 2 more questions here. How can I train my employees on their role in a cyber incident, and how often should training be updated?
Ideally, I would say all the time. So frequently, obviously you can train. The way employees kind of are targeted, or become targets or enablers, let's say unintentional enablers of a cybersecurity incident, is unintentionally, mistakenly clicking on a link, giving, what looks like a Microsoft login page. I log in, somebody has my access. And then I do something unintentionally. I go do Google search, I click on an ad, and I think it's legitimate, but ends up being a malware. So really, it's about educating in cybersecurity, educating on the types of attacks that we see, but also educating them about the concerns that the organization has. Education can be from courses to phishing simulations, all of that kind of gamut of information. I think at least twice a year would be nice to just keep that up to date, and just we forget, and knowing what to check. So if I get an email and I'm not sure about it, okay, maybe I should call the individual and say, did you send me this email? Especially emails regarding to financial transactions, all that. That's where we see business email compromise leading to financial fraud.
I think at ITS, we've been making this a cultural thing. I know Field Effect does this too, but it really permeates everything, cybersecurity in general, but also what happens when there's an incident. And so we have a first responder role that everybody fills at our organization. If you're a first responder, and I liken it to if we had a public pool as an organization, we'd all know CPR. Like, we should all know how to do that. And so in this case, we're dealing with data, so we should know what is an incident and how to deal with it and how to hand it off. It doesn't mean that they need to be experts, but they at least need to know the basic rules. And then we have some forms that they fill out, but we also do the education internally. We do these for clients too. We have a CyberBits newsletter thing that's going out, just all these pieces, and creating a culture in which everybody can talk about it is important too, because cyber events can be, anytime someone makes a mistake, it can be shameful. And that's whenever there isn't light shined on something, that's where the bad guys win, the bad people out there. And so I think tabletop exercises. So we actually, with Field Effect last year, did a tabletop exercise where we went through our incident response plan in real time. And it's basically, it's called a tabletop because traditionally you'd sit around a tabletop and you would read off a script, kind of like a read through that actors do when they're doing a specific scene, and you go through and you learn a lot from it. Monique and I got to spend a lot of time together when we did that, but yeah, it takes some time, and then you have to do it every year. So you should do it at least every year. And some frameworks out there, some requirements do require you to do that too. And we're seeing that these things are becoming more and more requirements depending upon what industry you're in. So that's only going to get more and more restrictive as we go along.
I will just add maybe to that is kind of encouraging employees to report issues when they see it. So without repercussions, because if there's a culture of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, I'm going to get in trouble, that kind of people are then hesitant to report it. So it's about, what are you doing? How do we educate you? What have we learned? That kind of builds confidence in that relationship. Sometimes you see a bit of tension there, and that is hard. Somebody doesn't report something and then it's too late.
Yeah. Employees are the front lines, right?
Yeah.
They're getting these emails, they're seeing these things. So definitely creating an atmosphere that they feel comfortable to be able to report these things kind of really helps to get those conversations going. Okay, last one. What makes a minor cyber incident versus a major cyber incident?
That's a good question. I think that varies, but I think I would say at its simplest form, it's the impact. So cyber incidents are happening all the time. There's always an event. Somebody is trying to gain access to a network. They're always, attempting brute force attacks if you have an externally exposed surface, all of that. But the major is the difference between a minor and a major is how far did they get? Right. So if, they were able to get to one point, but I was able to block them early on. Well, okay, I've blocked them early. They never got to a major incident. A major incident is when potentially more than one system is impacted, that your services are down. I would qualify it as that. So what is the impact on your operations, and how quickly are you able to respond?
Right. That impact word, in risk assessments too, same thing. The likelihood times the impact, really that's how you determine which things you're going to try to defend against above others, because we all have limited resources. And so I think finding that line ahead of time in those playbooks of what are the ones that we're going to make playbooks for that are most critical is really an important thing to figure out before everything happens. So
for sure. All right, I'll give it to anybody have any other questions? We still got some folks still in the Still asking questions. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so. Other than that, I just want to thank Sean and Monique for your time and really valuable information. Please email us at secure@itsasap.com to get the conversation started. Let's all work together to secure our environments, plan ahead. These things are not going to go away, so let's work together and protect ourselves. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.